name is John Bunke, and the title of my talk is The Dynamics of Disagreement in Metaphysics. There'll be a handout on the screen during the talk, but you can also access the handout at the link which I'll put in the description. Thanks. In this talk, I'm going to propose a new way of thinking about disagreements in first-order metaphysics. So I'm going to use as my example the debate between endurantism and perdurantism about persistence, the persistence of material objects. So endurantism says an object persists through an interval of time just in case it is wholly located at each moment in that interval. Perdurantism says that an object persists through an interval of time just in case it has a temporal part located at each moment throughout the interval. Instead of thinking of rival metaphysical theses, which is the neutral term I'll use for endurantism and perdurantism, instead of thinking of rival metaphysical theses as rival theories or as different languages, I'm going to instead propose that we treat them as alternative explanatory schemes. So the general thought would be that at most one theory of a certain phenomenon can be correct. No language is really the sole language that is appropriate to use in characterizing a phenomenon, but more than one explanatory scheme can be genuinely correct. One of the upshots of viewing metaphysical theses this way is that we get a better account of disagreement in metaphysics, better than either of two extant accounts, which I will discuss now. So the first of these is monistic realism, as I'll call it, which says rival metaphysical theses are alternative theories of the phenomenon of persistence. This view entails that at most one of endurantism and perdurantism may be true, and it says that disagreement between perdurantists and endurantists is straightforward factual disagreement, like that over what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Another view in the literature is what I'll call deflationism, which says that rival metaphysical theses are alternative languages, and no language is objectively preferable to any other. This view says that neither endurantism nor perdurantism is really correct in any robust sense. And for this view, the debate about persistence between endurantism and perdurantism is a merely verbal dispute, like that over whether a football is spherical. Neither of these accounts, the account of monistic realism or of deflationism of the nature of metaphysical disagreement, is right, I think. Neither is adequate, because we don't want to say that metaphysical disagreement is either straightforward factual disagreement or that it's merely verbal dispute. So what I want to do is get on the table a third option, which I think handles metaphysical disagreement in a way that is more satisfactory. My proposal, which I'll call pluralistic realism, is that we treat rival metaphysical theses, such as endurantism and perdurantism, as distinct explanatory schemes. If we do, then both endurantism and perdurantism can be genuinely correct, unlike the other two views on which neither is correct or at most one is correct. I don't have a definition of the notion of an explanatory scheme, but the idea is roughly that it is the materials from which explanations are generated. And I also won't have much to say about the nature of explanation, except that I am assuming something that I think is held in common by most models of scientific explanation, that it's possible for a set of claims to be true, accurate, supported by evidence, and so on, and yet be unexplanatory. So there's a distinction within the class of truths. Some of the truths are explanatory about a subject, and some of the truths about a subject are unexplanatory. I'm also going to assume that, in general, multiple explanations of a single phenomenon can be correct, provided that each is drawn from its own scheme. I think that there are some plausible examples of this, but of course no example is going to be uncontroversial. So one example, which I'm just going to mention and then move on because it's not my primary focus, is explaining an event of human behavior in neurobiological terms and also in folk psychological terms. Another sort of example would be explaining why something is a certain way, that is, explaining a fact, either by appeal to the role it was designed to play in a larger mechanism, or by appeal to the nature of the parts that make it up. For instance, we could explain why a segment of computer code produces a certain output by describing the role it's designed to play in a larger program, or we might explain this by stating what the input is and what sequence of operations are performed on that input as the code runs. My claim is that endurantism and perdurantism can be fruitfully thought of as distinct explanatory schemes, despite the fact that they do not appear this way on first glance. So what I'm going to do is use a couple of hypothetical examples to try and illuminate the relationship I see between endurantism and perdurantism, the relationship that holds between them on the view where these are two rival explanatory schemes. So imagine that Allison puts a hot mug of coffee on her desk at T1. At T2, a quote-unquote second mug of coffee appears next to it, identical in every way except that the coffee it contains is lukewarm. At T3, the original mug of coffee, which by now has cooled to lukewarm temperature, disappears, leaving only the second mug whose coffee is cold by T4. Let's suppose also that this sort of thing does happen in Allison's world. The perturantist description of this scenario starts with the idea that there's one four-dimensional mug of coffee here. It has two temporal parts. One from T1 to T3 has coffee in it that goes from hot to lukewarm as time passes. The second part, located from T2 to T4, has coffee in it that goes from lukewarm to cold. The temporal parts of the original mug just before it disappears at T3 are causally, or at least counterfactually related to the temporal parts of the second mug just after T2. At T3 then, the mug does something that's a bit like traveling back in time to T2. The endurantist description of this scenario would be roughly as follows. Coffee mugs are, of course, three-dimensional, not four-dimensional, so between T2 and T3, there are in fact two mugs of coffee on Allison's desk. One just pops into existence and happens to have the exact temperature of coffee in it at T2 that the original mug has at T3. At T3, the first mug then pops out of existence. The explanations, I claim, that are enabled by the perdurantist description of this situation are superior to those enabled by the endurantist description. But it's not accurate to say that endurantism is incompatible with the possibility of time travel. There is an endurantist description of the phenomena relating to the coffee mug that is perfectly true. It just doesn't generate explanations that are as satisfying as the perdurantist account. There are also phenomena which the endurantist is better equipped to explain than the perdurantist. For instance, many have complained that perdurantism cannot account for genuine change, or something similar, because it assimilates change to the exemplification of different properties by distinct spatial parts of an object. But the perdurantist response, of course, is that they do have an account of change. What change is variation in properties among different temporal parts of a single object. Again, though, the perdurantist explanation of why the fire poker is cold at 11 p.m., even though it was hot at 10 p.m. when it was taken out of the fire, although true, is not as satisfactory. I claim that there's a single large-scale phenomenon here, namely the persistence, or if you like, persistence behavior of material objects. Some aspects of this phenomenon are better explained by one or the other scheme. And the schemes are indeed rivals because the explanations they generate cannot be conjoined on pain of entailing some contradictions. The result of adopting the pluralistic realist view is that instead of being forced to say that endurantists and perdurantists are either engaged in a straightforward factual dispute or that they're talking past each other, we can say that their disagreement is genuine, though it is not straightforwardly factual. Disagreements like this are sometimes referred to as faultless disagreements, although this terminology leaves something to be desired. So instead, I'm going to use the expression complex disagreement, which is designed to contrast with, on the one hand, simple factual disagreement, and on the other with merely verbal disagreement. So I'm going to close my talk with some speculative, sketchy remarks on how the view that metaphysical theses are explanatory schemes can lead to a view of metaphysical disagreements as complex disagreements. So to start, consider 1, it is raining, and 2, it is not raining. Following the general approach of Kaplan's demonstratives, we can treat the content of an utterance of sentence 1 as a function from what Kaplan calls a circumstance of evaluation, which is an ordered pair of world and location in this application of the theory, to a truth value. The content of 1 will take a world location pair to the truth if and only if it is raining in that location in that world. Equivalently, we can think of the content of an utterance of 1 as the set of world location pairs, which that function evaluates to 1. Thinking of the content of 1 this way allows us to see that the content of 2, a different set of world location pairs, is in fact disjoint with the content of 1. No world location pair appears in both sets. Thus, the content of 1 and the content of 2 are logically incompatible. When we evaluate utterances of 1 and 2 for truth in context, at most one of these utterances can be true, provided that the two speakers are in the same location. If the speakers of 1 and 2 are in different locations, however, as in a long-distance phone call, then while there is a sense in which they are disagreeing, since they are uttering logically incompatible contents, there is also a sense in which they are making compatible assertions, since the utterances are evaluated for truth relative to different locations. Perhaps it is raining in the location of the agent who utters 1, though it is not raining where the speaker of 2 is located. In that case, both speakers would be correct because each would be saying something true. Now consider 3, material objects have temporal parts, and 4, material objects do not have temporal parts. I propose treating an explanatory scheme, such as endurantism or perdurantism, as an element of the circumstance of evaluation, just like we did with location in the previous example, thus assigning contents to 3 and 4 that are sets of ordered pairs of a world and an explanatory scheme. Then, although 3 and 4 would be assigned logically incompatible contents, disjoint sets of ordered pairs of world and explanatory scheme, speakers who uttered 3 and 4 would be saying things which could both be true if they were in contexts where different explanatory schemes are operative. If, on the other hand, 3 and 4 are uttered in contexts in which the same scheme is operative, then at most one of the utterances is true. Thanks, that's it.